Cecilia Payne is perhaps the greatest scientist you have never heard of, and that fact alone tells you everything about the world she was born into. She was the woman who discovered what the universe is made of, literally. Before Cecilia Payne, humanity did not know that stars were made primarily of hydrogen and helium. After Cecilia Payne, we knew that single discovery, her doctoral thesis, written when she was just 25 years old, wrote the entire field of astronomy and laid the foundation for everything we understand about the cosmos today. And yet, because she was a woman in the early 20th century, because she dared to challenge the most powerful male minds in science, her discovery was almost suppressed and her name was nearly erased from history. Her story is not one of fame or fortune. It is a story of brilliance ignored, of truth buried under ego, and of a quiet woman who kept working regardless. Cecilia Helena Payne was born on May 10th, 1900. In Wendover, England, her father, Edward Payne, was a historian and a musician. Her mother, Emma, was a painter. Cecilia grew up surrounded by books, art, and music, but her father died when she was only 4 years old, leaving the family with almost no money. Her mother raised Cecilia and her younger brother alone, scraping together pennies for school fees, determined that her children would have the education she had been denied. Cecilia was a strange, intense child. She loved puzzles. She loved the night sky. She would lie on the grass in the dark, staring upward, asking herself questions that no one around her could answer. What are those lights? Why do they shine? What are they made of? She did not know it yet, but she was already becoming an astronomer. At school, Cecilia excelled at mathematics and science, but she was told repeatedly that these were not proper subjects for a young lady. The teachers encouraged her to study home economics, to learn how to run a household, to prepare for marriage and motherhood. Cecilia refused. She won a scholarship to Cambridge University in 1919, one of the first women ever admitted to study science at that ancient institution. She threw herself into her studies with a ferocity that shocked her male classmates. But Cambridge had a cruel rule. Women could attend lectures, take exams, and earn degrees, but they were not actually allowed to receive those degrees. The university would not grant women full membership. Cecilia completed her studies, passed her exams with distinction, and walked away with nothing but a piece of paper saying she had attended. No degree, no recognition. Just the bitter taste of institutional sexism. Cecilia knew that England would never give her a real career. The doors of British science were closed to women, no matter how brilliant. So she looked across the Atlantic. In 1923, she applied for a fellowship to work at the Harvard College Observatory in Cambridge, Massachusetts. The director of the observatory was a man named Harlow Shapley, a gruff, ambitious astronomer who had never hired a woman for a research position. But Cecilia's application was so extraordinary that Shapley could not refuse her. He offered her the fellowship, though he made it clear that she would be paid almost nothing and that she would have to work in a dusty basement office. Because the main building was for men only, Cecilia packed her bags, boarded a ship, and never looked back. At Harvard, Cecilia was given a mountain data. The observatory had collected thousands of photographic plates of starlight, each one a strip of black and white film showing the spectrum of a star broken into its component colors. These spectrums contained the fingerprints of the elements inside each star, but no one had been able to read them properly. Cecilia sat in that basement, day after day, night after night, studying those plates. She developed a new method for measuring the intensity of the spectral lines. She noticed patterns that no one else had seen. And slowly she began to realize something astonishing. The stars were not made of the same mixture of elements as the Earth. They were overwhelmingly composed of two things, hydrogen and helium. Everything else, all the iron and carbon and oxygen that we find on our planet, was just a tiny impurity in the cosmic ocean. In 1925, Cecilia Payne wrote her doctoral thesis. The title was Stellar Atmospheres, a contribution to the observational Study of high temperature and the reversing layers of stars. It was a dry title for an earth-shattering document. In that thesis, Cecilia proved that hydrogen was a million times more abundant than any other element in the stars. She proved that the sun, which scientists had long assumed was made of similar stuff to the Earth, was actually 90% hydrogen, and almost all of the rest helium. She had discovered the true chemical composition of the universe. She submitted her thesis to a committee of Harvard's top astronomers, including the legendary Henry Norris Russell, one of the most powerful and arrogant men in American science. Russell read her work and told her she was wrong. He said her calculations must be mistaken because everyone knew that stars had similar compositions to the Earth. He did not say this because he had evidence. He said it because he could not imagine that a young woman in a basement could be right, while he, the great Henry Norris Russell, was wrong. Cecilia knew she was correct. Her data was solid. Her math was flawless. But she was a woman in 1925, and she had no power to fight the most famous astronomer in the country. So she added a sentence to her thesis that she would later call the biggest mistake of my life. She wrote that her results were almost certainly not real. She buried her own discovery to satisfy a man's ego. 4 years later, in 1929, Henry Norris Russell published a paper. In that paper, he arrived at exactly the same conclusion that Cecilia Payne had already proven 4 years earlier. He showed that the sun was composed mostly of hydrogen. The scientific community hailed Russell as a genius. They named the discovery after him. They gave him awards. They wrote his name into the textbooks. Cecilia Payne received no credit. For decades, most astronomers believed that Henry Norris Russell had discovered the composition of the stars. The truth that the discovery was made by a 25-year-old woman in a basement was quietly forgotten. What did Cecilia do when her discovery was stolen? She did not rage publicly. She did not write angry letters to journals. She did not sue or demand credit. She simply went back to work. She continued studying stars, continued publishing papers, continued mentoring young scientists. She married a Russian-born astronomer named Sergei Gaposchkin, and together they had 3 children. She balanced motherhood and research at a time when women were expected to choose one or the other. She wrote books on variable stars and on the evolution of galaxies. She became the first woman to be promoted to full professor at Harvard, though. It took until 1956, 33 years after she first arrived, for that to happen. She became the first woman to chair a department at Harvard. She never stopped working. In 1956, she also became the first woman to receive the Henry Norris Russell Prize, the highest award given by the American Astronomical Society. The irony was thick enough to cut with a knife. The prize was named after the man who had stolen her discovery, and she was receiving it for the work that he had claimed as his own. In her acceptance speech, Cecilia did not mention the theft. She did not mention Russell's name at all. She simply thanked the society and spoke about her love of the stars. That was Cecilia Payne's way. She did not fight for credit. She fought for knowledge. And she believed that in the end, the truth would outlive the egos. It was not until the 1970s, when a new generation of female astronomers began digging through the archives, that Cecilia Payne's story came to light. They found her original 1925 thesis. They read her correct conclusions. They saw the sentence she had added to appease Henry Norris Russell, the sentence that had buried her discovery for 4 decades. They were horrified. They wrote papers and articles correcting the historical record. They interviewed Cecilia, who was then in her 70s, and she spoke about the events with a calm that astonished them. She did not seem angry. She seemed almost amused. "You see," she said, "I was young and I was a woman and I had no authority. But the data was correct. I knew the data was correct." And eventually the world caught up. When asked if she regretted adding that apologetic sentence to her thesis, she paused for a long moment. Then she said, "Yes, I regret it, but I do not dwell on it. There's too much work to do." That was the essence of Cecilia Payne. She did not have time for bitterness. The universe was too vast, The question's too important, the stars too beautiful. She had discovered what the stars were made of, and that knowledge, once released, could never be buried again. She did not need a trophy. She had the stars. Cecilia Payne died on December 7th, 1979, at the age of 79. She had spent her final years watching from afar as the field of astronomy exploded with new discoveries, black holes, neutron stars, exoplanets, the expanding universe. Every single one of those discoveries rested on her foundational insight that the universe was overwhelmingly hydrogen and helium. Without that knowledge, modern astrophysics would have been impossible. She had written the first page of a book that hundreds of other scientists would spend the next century filling. Today, Cecilia Payne's name is finally appearing in textbooks. There's a crater on the moon named after her. There is an asteroid named after her. The Harvard Observatory, which once banished her to a dusty basement, now has a lecture hall named in her honor.